While the crown prince was unconscious from drunkenness, he called out, "A she!" Everyone turned to look at us. At the dinner, my cousin and I were the only ones whose names contained the character Xi. Before the Empress could speak, my cousin accidentally knocked over her teacup, looking flustered as if she knew she was about to be exposed. That's when I realized my cousin had been reborn, too. In my past life, I was the one who acted strangely. The Empress naturally arranged our marriage. In public, I am the glamorous crown princess. Behind my back, the crown prince accused me of being scheming and of currying favor with the powerful. I leaned forward slightly to wipe the tea off my cousin. A red scar ran across the back of his exposed right hand. The crown princess must be beautiful and have a flawless figure. Main text. The Empress's gaze passed right past me and landed on my cousin. She smiled and beckoned. "Come here. Which family are you from? I've never seen you before." My cousin curled her lips into a smile, rose to her feet, and walked gracefully to the Empress to pay her respects. "Your Majesty, this servant is Song Xian, and my father serves as Deputy Director of the Bureau of the Imperial Stables." A sixth-rank official position was truly insignificant among the assembled aristocratic families. The Empress's smile faded slightly, and she nodded slightly. "No wonder you look unfamiliar. Come closer so I can get a good look at you." I stared quietly at the incense burner in front of me. I watched as wisps of bluish-gray mist swirled and drifted out, then dispersed. Whether in this life or the last, this is my only hobby for passing the time. I've never been fond of attending banquets, but since the Empress sent an invitation and all the noble young ladies in the capital would be attending, I naturally couldn't refuse. In a past life, as I was letting my mind wander, I suddenly heard my name. My cousin gave me a subtle nudge to snap me out of it. When I realized that the crown prince had murmured my name, my heart skipped a beat, and I accidentally knocked over my teacup. The character Xi in my name and my cousin's name is pronounced the same but is written differently. My name is Xi. Her name is Song Xian. To tell us apart, our elders called me She and her, and in seeing this, the Empress's smile grew even broader, and she immediately announced the arranged marriage for us. I lowered my head, feeling a flush of embarrassment spread from the tops of my ears down to my neck. After returning home, I settled down to prepare for my wedding, my heart filled with joy. On the day the crown princess's royal procession was carried into the East Palace, the sound of firecrackers filled the city, and the 10-li-long procession of red wedding paraphernalia bathed the entire Suzaku Avenue in red. I sat on the wedding bed, wondering how to tell Zhaowen that I was Xixin, the one who had been exchanging letters with him. Zhaowen arrived very late. He didn't show up until the red candles were nearly burned out. He coldly lifted the veil and hurried away, without so much as a glance in my direction. The servants in the palace are masters at reading the wind and adjusting their course. Since the crown prince doesn't care for me, my life is naturally difficult. In winter, I get the smallest share of coal, and in summer, I'm the last in line for ice. That year, I went to get some charcoal, and on my way back, I ran into Zhaowen. After I got married, I was assigned to the most remote courtyard. Every time I went to see him, the guard at the gate would turn me away, saying he was too busy with official business. When we caught a glimpse of each other from a distance, his eyes were filled with annoyance and disdain, as if I were some kind of monster. Yet in his letters, he treated me as a confidant. We talked about romance, the daily lives of ordinary people, and matters of the nation and the world. Every word and every sentence was filled with his heartfelt sincerity. He once told me that he would come to my house in person to ask for my hand in marriage. I held the letter in my hands, too embarrassed to read it more than once. I was also spoiled rotten at home. Everything was done for me, so naturally, I couldn't stand any hardship. Determined to change the situation, I ignored the housekeeper's protests and stopped his palanquin in the rain-soaked night. Kneeling in the mud, I tilted my head back and recited the code words we both knew to him, one by one. After we got married, even though we didn't see each other very often, we still kept up our routine of exchanging 3 letters every month. Zhaowen lifted the curtain of the palanquin and looked down at me from above, a cold, dismissive smile curving his lips. "Guards, Take the crown princess consort to the dungeon to reflect on her actions. It was cold and damp in the dungeon, and rats scurried past my feet, but I had nowhere to hide. The old women held me down tightly, and the tattoo artist carved the character for the font on my wrist. Suddenly, it all made sense to me. Zhaoan believed that I had stolen someone else's letter and had schemed to pass myself off as the person he mentioned at the spring banquet. That was why the Empress granted the marriage. I don't want to be misunderstood. After leaving the dungeon, I dragged myself over to find him, still suffering from a high fever that wouldn't break. She broke off a branch of plum blossoms in full bloom, pinned it to a letter, and handed the package to the guard standing at the study door, begging him to deliver it to Zhaoan. One glance is all it takes. My handwriting is a style I've created myself, and no one but those closest to me, who are by my side day and night, can imitate it. This time, Zhaoan let me in. Her heart, which she hadn't yet had a chance to calm, was shattered by the force of his slap. His eyes were bloodshot. Are you really that impatient? She's body isn't even cold yet, and you're already rushing to claim her belongings as your own. I collapsed onto the desk, and before I could say a word in my defense, I was flipped over completely. I spent my wedding night at this desk. I bit my lip as tears fell one by one onto the letters we had once exchanged. He bit into the flesh at my neck as if to punish me, and told me so much. It turns out he arrived so late on the day of the wedding. It was my cousin who took the letter I had left behind at home to him and, posing as Shishin, poured out her heart to him. She knew I was impersonating her, but for the sake of the friendship between the Shen and Song families, she had no choice but to swallow her grievances. She dared not argue or fight for his attention, so she could only hide in the shadows and remain his confidant behind the scenes. Zhaoan gripped my chin, forcing me to look up, his eyes brimming with scorn. Xinlian even showed me the plum blossom seal at the end of her signature. What more can you say? He wiped away the tears from the corners of my eyes and snorted softly. Qin Nianxi, haven't you been scheming to become the crown princess? Now that your wish has truly come true, why are you crying? The plum blossom seal was carved for me by a craftsman using the finest chicken bloodstone when I was 10 years old. It is the only one I own, and I never part with it. But since my cousin lives with me and eats with me every day, it would be a piece of cake for her to make a rubbing of one if she wanted to. No sooner had I begun to explain than he cut me off sharply. I tilted my head back to face his anger. Zhao Anhong's eyes were red as she looked down at the letter lying beneath my temples. Xian is dead, you can explain it however you like. I opened my mouth, but the words stuck in my throat. I just found out that my cousin ran into some bandits a couple of days ago while on her way to Qingzhou to clear her head. Both the man and the horse-drawn cart fell off the cliff, leaving no trace of them. After that night, I was completely trapped in the side hall. Without Zhaoan's orders, they couldn't even take a single step outside. It wasn't until Zhaoan ascended the throne that I was brought into the palace and granted the title of concubine. The character in my title was the Zifram Song Xian. Zhaoan would come by once every 2 weeks, and each time he would cover the lower half of my face. The adults always say that my eyes look just like my cousin's. Even the concubines who had just entered the palace bore a resemblance to my cousin. In bed, he pressed down on the tattoo on my wrist and called me consort she. It constantly reminds me that I stole someone else's belongings, took someone else's name, and even this title is something I've taken advantage of. The new emperor granted a general amnesty upon his accession. Yet in this palace of mine, not even the window paper has been replaced. In my 3rd year in the palace, I became pregnant. Zhaoan's attitude toward me has improved considerably. At least he takes me into consideration during our intimate moments and stays the night afterward. Occasionally, he would take me for a walk in the imperial garden and speak to me in a soft, gentle voice. Seen from a distance, they really do look like a loving couple. Emperor Zhaoan had difficulty conceiving an heir, and it wasn't until 3 years after his accession that I finally began to show signs of pregnancy. It's not just him. The Empress Dowager has been paying me a lot more attention. The palace has changed, and the maidservants around me have become more attentive. Items from the imperial household department were delivered as a matter of priority, and even the doctor sent to check on his health was replaced with a highly respected and renowned physician. But they still couldn't save the baby. When he was 3 months old, Zhaoan traveled to Qingzhou and brought back his cousin, who had come back from the dead. She wasn't dead at all. After falling off the cliff, she was rescued by a kind stranger. On my first day at the palace, my cousin came to visit me. She smiled as she told me about the amusing incidents that happened on the way back, and every word she spoke reflected Zhaoan's care and affection for her. I listened quietly, occasionally chiming in. Most of the time, I just stared at the incense burner. When I was the crown princess, there was nothing in my room. When I'm bored, all I can do is watch the smoke curl slowly upward and drift away into the air. Watching the incense burn out and the smoke dissipate, the day has come to an end. My cousin said she was tired, picked up her teacup to take a sip, and suddenly lowered her voice to ask me, "Little sister, do you hold a grudge against me?" I stared at the smoke rising from the incense burner, not knowing how to answer her. Perhaps it was resentment that she had impersonated me, causing me to be despised and humiliated by Zhaoan for so many years. But whenever I feel resentful, images always come to mind of my cousin from my youth, the one who, despite her own poor health resulting from saving me from drowning, dragged her sick body to shield me from the whip and cared for me day and night when I had a persistent high fever. No matter how much one blames others, in the end, the only one to blame is Zhaoan. I blame him for being blind, with a pearl right before his eyes. He chose a fish's eye instead. I resent that he convicted me based on one-sided testimony. I was so lost in thought that I didn't hear the last thing my cousin said before she got up. But I'm resentful. On the third day after my cousin entered the palace, I lost my child. The imperial physician said my condition was caused by emotional stagnation and a deficiency of both qi and blood. Zhaoan didn't arrive until late one night half a month later, and even then, he'd been kicked out after upsetting his cousin. I didn't have the energy to get up and go through the motions with him. He looked down at me from above, his gaze lingering for a moment on my abdomen. I had this investigated, and it has nothing to do with Xian. His voice drifted down lightly, carrying an underlying warning. I let out a soft and turned away. Losing the baby isn't necessarily a bad thing. Xian just got back and is already in a bad mood. At least this way, the baby won't be born and disturb her peace. I closed my eyes so he wouldn't see the tears welling up in them. He stood there for a moment, found it boring, and then left. After that, I didn't say another word. My cousin, on the other hand, comes to see me every now and then, bringing soup and stews, as well as new fabrics and jewelry, especially paintings and calligraphy that bear my handwriting. Everything tells me that she's sitting in the seat I didn't get to sit in back then. Zhaoan defied public opinion and elevated her to the rank of imperial consort. In the 12th month of my 5th year in the palace, I died on the coldest day of the year. Zhaoan had me buried in the most remote corner of the consort's mausoleum. The tombstone was inscribed with the title Consort She. It didn't even bear my name. I remember that as my last vestiges of consciousness were fading, my cousin was wailing her heart out outside the hall. It really seems like they're reluctant to let go. In this life, everything starts anew. My thoughts came flooding back. My cousin was already seated below Her Majesty the Empress. It looks like she's about to get what she wants. On the carriage ride back to the mansion, my cousin and I rode together. She stared at my face again and again, then took my hand and gently stroked the burn scar on the back of it. "Does it still hurt? It's all my fault for being so careless." The day before yesterday, my cousin came into my room to talk to me and accidentally spilled it on the back of my hand. That didn't happen in my past life. She had come back to life before I did. I only returned this morning just as I was about to leave. And that's when I felt a burning pain on the back of my hand. I might as well just rip off the bandage. It fulfilled her wish and satisfied me as well. I pulled my hand back, tucked it into my sleeve, and gave her a faint smile. "It doesn't hurt anymore. Don't blame yourself, sis." Congratulations, sis. On the surface, everything was just as it had been before. They treated her with respect and regarded her as their own older sister. If I could live my life over again, I'd just want to stay away from them. I don't want to get mixed up in these troubles anymore. My cousin pulled me into her arms, a slight sob catching in her throat. "It's my fault. little sister. For a moment, I wasn't sure if she was talking about a past life or this one, or perhaps both. I didn't ask any further questions. I just looked out at the bustling street through the curtains fluttering in the wind. It's been so long since I've seen such a vibrant street scene that it momentarily dazzled me. The carriage came to a stop in front of the Shin residence. My cousin got out of the car first, glanced back at me as if she wanted to say something but held back, and finally lifted the hem of her skirt and walked off in the direction of the Song family's house. I watched her back disappear around the corner, then turned and walked through the door. My mother was waiting in the parlor. When she saw me come back, she hurriedly pulled me close and examined me carefully from head to toe. Did anything happen at the banquet? I heard the crown prince got drunk and caused a scene. No. I shook my head. Don't worry, Mom. Only then did she notice the red scar on the back of my hand, and her expression suddenly changed. Why hasn't this wound healed yet? Didn't you apply the ointment? I put some on, it's just taking a little longer to heal. My mother took my hand tenderly and chattered on, instructing the maid to fetch some better medicine. I let her do whatever she wanted with me. My heart was filled with comfort. After I was sent to the East Palace, Zhaowen wouldn't even let my mother come see me. I can only go back for half a day on my father's birthday. Every time, my mother would hold my hand and look at me for a long time, and I would only tell her the good news, not the bad. My mother didn't say a word. Her eyes were just red. 3 days later, the imperial edict arranging the marriage arrived. However, this time, the position granted was that of a secondary consort to the crown prince. My cousin's face paled for a moment. Then she respectfully accepted the imperial decree. I smiled and congratulated her, while she kept her head down, running her fingers over the words second consort in the imperial edict. She was still a little bothered by it after all. But her family background wasn't prestigious enough. Becoming a secondary consort to the crown prince was already quite an achievement. It's just that it has nothing to do with me anymore. I'm just curious, the thing she used every trick in the book to snatch from me in her past life, now that I'm handing it over to her on a silver platter, will she be any more secure sitting on it than I was back then? A few days later, the Empress summoned my sister and me to the palace. He chatted with his sister for a while, holding her hand, then turned to look at me. He asked me with a broader smile, "Nian Shi, do you have a special someone?" My heart skipped a beat as I met my cousin's probing gaze. She put on a shy expression and whispered, "Not yet." They exchanged a glance and covered their mouths with a smile. Just as they were talking, Zhaowen arrived as well. The moment Zhaowen saw his sister, his eyes lit up. His gaze swept over me without lingering. This was the first time I had ever seen him in this life. He bore no resemblance whatsoever to the sinister figure he had been in my past life. I glanced over and then looked away, keeping my head down to make myself as inconspicuous as possible. The crab apples by the lake are in full bloom. Take Xian to see them. The Empress spoke, and Zhaowen naturally agreed. After they left, the Empress summoned me to sit at her side. "Nian Shi, you're 16 now, old enough to get married. Your mother came to the palace a few days ago to speak with me for a while. She's worried about your marriage as well." I blinked at her, not believing a single word she said. My mother would love for me to stay home a few more years. How could she possibly be worried about my marriage? But since the Empress has said so, they must be bringing in a groom. In her past life, her favorite pastime was playing matchmaker. Zhaowen doesn't treat me well, and the Empress must feel guilty about it every time she arranges a match for a noble lady. She always has me summoned from the Eastern Palace. It gave me a little breathing room. The Empress smiled as she took my hand. "I do have someone in mind. What do you think?" My heart skipped a beat. In her past life. She spoke in just this tone and with just this smile, and then betrothed me to Zhaowen. I lowered my eyes. My fingertips felt slightly cool. "Nian Shi, what do you think of the Marquis of Jing'an?" The Shin family of the Jing'an Marquis Manor shares the same surname as my own clan. For 3 generations, their ancestors defended the northern frontier, and the entire family has a legacy of loyalty and valor. After the old Marquis fell in battle, the Marquis's wife held on for 2 years before passing away as well. Now, Only the heir apparent, Qin Shixing, remains in the manor. At the age of 14, he took command of the army on his father's behalf. At 17, he quelled a rebellion in the northern frontier, and when he returned to the capital to receive his title, even His Majesty personally came to the city gates to welcome him. During my final year as consort Shi, I huddled inside my cloak as I accompanied my matron to the Imperial Medical Bureau to fetch medicine. The wind and snow were fierce, and as I was walking quickly, I didn't watch my step and stepped into a hole in the ice, taking a rather embarrassing fall. Before the nanny could reach out to help me, a pair of hands had already reached out to me. I looked up and met a pair of calm eyes. The young general crouched before me, his armor covered in snow, one corner of his cloak fluttering in the wind. He said nothing, but simply helped me up from the ground, bent down to pick up the scattered medicine pouches, carefully brushed the snow off them, and handed them back to me. The whole thing took no more than a few breaths. I lowered my eyelashes and feigned innocence. This humble servant is slow of wit. I do not understand what your highness means. From what I can see, that child would be a good match for you. You both share the Shin surname, who knows? Perhaps you were even part of the same family 500 years ago. Even though he's 5 years older than you, being older means he's more considerate and knows how to take care of you. Who knows? Maybe he even held you when you were little. I lowered my head, hiding my embarrassment beneath my eyelashes. Your Highness is joking. I would never dare to harbor such thoughts about the Marquis. This wasn't just a polite remark. Qin Shixing's reputation for decisive and ruthless military campaigns in the northern frontier had spread throughout the capital. While the city's noble women admired him, very few were actually willing to marry him. Moreover, since he was rarely in the capital, marrying him would mean living alone in an empty house, a situation few could endure. My nephew here is just a bit reserved, but he's a wonderful young man. These past few years haven't been easy for Zhixing, and I don't want some spoiled noble lady coming along to cause him trouble. I can see you have a quiet disposition, you'll be just right. My heart fluttered slightly, and a flood of thoughts crossed my mind. Having been confined in the Imperial Palace for 5 years in my previous life, I know more or less everything about the power struggles among the various factions in the capital. Qin Shixing is her own nephew. Over the years, the Shin family has been left with only one surviving son, and the Empress lives in constant fear in the palace, dreading that one day bad news might arrive from the northern frontier. She wanted to find a suitable match for her nephew, preferably a girl who was well-behaved and wouldn't cause trouble, so as to avoid domestic strife that might distract him. As for me, I was born into a family of moderate standing. My father held the position of Grand Tutor and was often at the Emperor's side. Yet he never became involved in the strife of the imperial court. He is indeed the best candidate. The Empress paused and looked toward the door. What a coincidence, just as we were talking about it. Here they come. Compared to how I remembered him, he looked much younger now. The weariness had faded from his brow, replaced by the sharp-edged vigor typical of a young man. Yet those eyes remained unchanged, as still as a pool of stagnant water, making it impossible to fathom what lay within them. He knelt on one knee to pay his respects, his voice low and steady. This servant, Qin Shixing, pays his respects to Her Majesty the Empress. Hurry up, the Empress said with a smile, raising her hand. We were just talking about you, and here you are. This is the eldest daughter of Grand Tutor Shin's family. She's actually a relative of yours. Qin Shixing stood up, and his gaze fell on me. He gave a slight nod. Miss Shin. I lowered my eyes and bowed my head in return. Greetings, Your Grace. The Empress's gaze shifted back and forth between us, and her smile grew even broader. Nian Shi, you may go back first. I'll have someone inform your sister. Shixing, give Nian Shi a ride. No sooner had the Empress finished speaking than, before I could even decline, Qin Shixing had already agreed. Yes. He stepped aside to let me pass, his posture upright, but his gaze remained fixed on the ground the entire time. He didn't spare me a single glance. I followed him out of the Zhaoyang Hall. The begonia trees lining both sides of the palace path were in full bloom, their petals blown by the wind, swirling as they settled on the stone pavers. He led the way ahead of me, walking at a steady pace, keeping exactly 3 steps ahead of me. I never expected to run into my cousin. The smile on her face hadn't faded, and she gave me a shy nod. When Zhaowen saw us walking together, the smile on his face faded somewhat, and he bowed slightly to Qin Shixing. Qin Shixing returned the bow, his demeanor neither subservient nor arrogant. Zhaowen's gaze fell on me, lingering for a fleeting moment before shifting away. His tone was matter-of-fact. "Miss Qin." I bowed my head in a gesture of respect. In a past life, I knelt before him, crying, begging, and pleading for an explanation, but all I received in return was contempt and indifference. Now that we've met again, it doesn't stir the slightest ripple in my heart. My cousin stepped forward, took my hand, and looked at me and Qin Shixing with a smile. "Little sister, are you leaving the palace?" "That's perfect. His Highness the Crown Prince and I are also heading to the Imperial Garden. Why don't we walk together for a bit?" As she spoke, her gaze swept over Qin Shixing, and something flashed briefly in her eyes. Just as I was about to speak, Qin Shixing spoke first. "I am here on the Empress's orders to escort Miss Qin out of the palace, so I cannot linger. Your Highness the Crown Prince, Miss Song, I must take my leave." As soon as he finished speaking, he stepped aside to let me go first, his manner crisp and decisive, without the slightest hesitation. I curved my lips into a smile, gave my cousin a slight nod, and set off after her. After taking a few steps, I heard my cousin's gentle voice from behind me. "Your Highness, the wind is strong by the lake. Let's walk a little slower." Zhaowen gave a low reply. There was a touch of tenderness in that tone that I had never heard before. When he dropped me off at the palace gate, Qin Shixing stopped, turned around, and looked at me. "Miss Qin, I have a question." I looked up at him. He paused for a moment, then spoke in a very low voice. "Just now in the hall, Miss Qin said she dared not even dream of the Marquis. What I wish to ask is, does Miss Qin not dare to dream of him? Or is she simply unwilling to do so?" I froze in my tracks, and my ears instantly turned bright red. "Why are you eavesdropping again?" After Qin Shixing finished speaking, he didn't dare look at me. He lowered his head and took a step back. "I apologize for my impertinence. Please take your time, Miss Qin." I gave him a long, deep look, then turned and got into the carriage. As I lifted the curtain of the palanquin, I was caught off guard when my gaze met his dejected eyes. I chuckled and made a bold decision. "Your Excellency, there will be a Buddhist service at Angwa Temple in the southern part of the city in 3 days. If the Marquis has time, please come." 3 days go by quickly. I rummaged through my trunks and selected a pale yellow jacket, then pinned a white magnolia hairpin into my bun. My mother asked me why I was in the mood to dress up today, and I told her that since I was going with her to burn incense, I naturally wanted to look my best. She gave me a couple of suspicious looks, but didn't ask any more questions. Angwa Temple was bustling with worshippers, while my mother went to the main hall to donate sesame oil. I made an excuse to take a walk around the temple and made my way to the plum grove on the back hill. In March, the plum blossoms had already faded, leaving a landscape of lush greenery, a sight that felt even more serene than a tree in full bloom. I stood under the largest plum tree and waited for about the time it takes to drink a cup of tea before I heard footsteps behind me. Miss Qin. Qin Shixing wasn't wearing his armor today. Dressed in an indigo blue robe, he looked less fierce and a bit more gentle. He took a small brocade box from his sleeve and held it out to me. "I was rude in the palace that day. Please accept this as an apology." I took it and opened it. Inside lay a plum blossom hairpin, carved from white jade. The petals are so thin they let light shine through, and even the stamens are rendered in exquisite detail. It's clear at a glance that this is no ordinary piece. "Your Excellency has been too generous," I said, holding the hairpin in the palm of my hand without refusing it. But what I said that day was not merely a polite remark. He looked up at me. "I am of humble birth and of modest talent. I am unworthy of the Marquis's many military achievements." I lowered my eyelashes, and my voice softened. "But I do not wish to speak insincerely. Between unwilling and afraid, this humble maiden is." afraid. As soon as the words were spoken, all that remained was the sound of the wind. I kept my head down, my ears burning, and my heart pounding. It was a long time before Shinjishing spoke. Miss Shin, at the age of 14, I took to the battlefield and killed enemies. At 17, I was in theft as a marquis. I have seen mountains of corpses and seas of blood. I have seen enemy heads displayed on city walls, and I have witnessed every blizzard in the northern frontier. But I have never met a person who made me dare not come any closer than 3 steps. He paused for a moment. I was rude that day because I was afraid that if I didn't say one more thing, I would never have another chance to speak for the rest of my life. I jerked my head up. He stood a foot away, his eyes darting about in panic. His face flushed all the way from the tips of his ears to his neck. So, he took a deep breath. Miss Shin, I did not come here today to admire the plum blossoms. I have come to ask for your hand in marriage. I want to marry you. He spoke so bluntly, so clumsily, without a trace of the reserve and tact one would expect from a marquis, that he seemed more like a soldier on the battlefield, charging headlong toward his target without a second thought. I couldn't help but let a smile cross my lips. Your Excellency, no one proposes marriage on their second meeting. This isn't the second time I've seen you, he blurted out. Realizing what he'd said, he furrowed his brow slightly, as if weighing his words. When you were little, I really did hold you. At your first birthday ceremony, the item you chose was me. I was completely taken aback. I recall an embarrassing incident from when I was learning to draw as a child and was often teased by the adults. I clearly didn't pick up a paintbrush, so why do I love painting so much? I don't understand. I asked them innocently. They laughed until they doubled over every time. I blushed and was just about to scold him. I heard my mother calling my name. I had no choice but to swallow my anger and glare at him. Don't ever bring this up again. Qin Shixing's eyes lit up when he heard the words from now on. So does that mean you agree? Yes. Right? I covered my face, let out a soft and ran off as fast as I could. On the way back, he rode his horse right behind our carriage the whole time. Seeing me lift the curtain every now and then, how could my mother not have figured it out? My mother didn't call me out on it. She just smiled as she tucked a strand of hair behind my ear and said in a very low voice, You look familiar to me. Whose son are you? The Marquis of Jing'an, Qin Shixing. My mother paused for a moment with the round fan in her hand and murmured, There's bound to be some tradition behind the Zhuazhou ceremony. I remained silent. She suddenly smiled. He really is a good boy. When you were a baby and had your grabbing ceremony, he came along with Lady Ho. You clung to the hem of his robe and wouldn't let go. You cried so loudly that the whole mansion could hear you. After that, he actually stayed at our house for 2 hours, and only pulled his hand away after he'd lulled you to sleep. I paused for a moment, so it was true after all. He was only 5 years old at the time. With a stern expression on his face, he said to your father in all seriousness, Since your daughter has chosen me, I will certainly live up to her trust. My mother burst out laughing. Your dad was so angry his mustache stood on end. I lowered my head and glanced out the window out of the corner of my eye. My ears were burning. After resting for an hour, I put on my veil and left through the back door. Red lanterns have already been hung at the Song residence. On the day of the arranged marriage, my cousin ransacked my room while I was in the bathroom. Naturally, nothing turned up. As soon as I returned, I burned all the letters left in my room, and I even found an excuse to expel from the mansion the maid my cousin had planted in my service. Once unfaithful, never to be trusted again. When I was young, my cousin and I rescued her from a brothel. Yet she remembers only my cousin's kindness. Even without a handwritten letter from me, she could still forge one, so they must have already verified each other's identities. Besides, I don't know what my cousin said to Zhaoan, but their wedding date was moved up by a month. Without stopping, I made my way to Jingyun Pavilion. Jingyun Pavilion is a gathering place for poets and scholars. Though called a pavilion, it is actually a garden built along the lake. Inside, there is a bookshop, a tea house, and a music room, where literati and poets often gather to recite poetry and compose couplets. Noble young ladies can also enjoy the flowers and sip tea here, free from the constraints faced by men. In my past life, the letters I exchanged with Zhaoan were delivered via the Jingyun Pavilion. At that time, I used the pen name Xinto leave behind poems and letters at Jingyun Pavilion, and he responded under the pen name Guest beneath the eucalyptus. Jingyun Pavilion is open only 3 times a month. I'm going there today just to have my name removed from the list. From now on, Jingyun Pavilion will no longer forward letters to me. I've only been here once, a few years ago. The rest of the time, that maid delivered my messages for me. I didn't expect her to send it to her cousin first for a look before sending it back. I had just checked out when I ran into a close friend I hadn't seen in a long time. Today, she just happened to be holding a poetry contest here. I couldn't refuse, so I had no choice but to sit down with her. From the moment I walked in, my cousin looked uncomfortable, and she kept her eyes fixed on me out of the corner of her eye. As if I were oblivious, I raised my cup and played the game with great enthusiasm. My cousin is a regular here. She never misses a month. It's just that she came by right before the wedding. She must have realized the maid wasn't delivering the message, so she came over herself to check. I got up and left the table, and my cousin followed right behind me, eagerly asking, "How did you end up here?" I stopped in my tracks. "Can't I come?" My cousin paused for a moment, then took my hand and said affectionately, "You've misunderstood, little sister. I was just worried you wouldn't feel comfortable. You never came when I invited you before." I raised an eyebrow. People always change. Zhaoan came out of the music room across the hall, saw us, and called out my cousin's name. My cousin's face paled for a moment. She immediately let go of my hand and curtsied to Zhaoan. Zhaoan walked over quickly, his gaze resting on his cousin's face, and asked with concern, "What are you doing here? Didn't you say you weren't feeling well and were going to rest at home?" My cousin lowered her eyes and replied softly, "Your Highness, I was resting, but the manager of Jingyun Pavilion sent word that there was an urgent matter requiring my personal attention." At that point, she glanced at me out of the corner of her eye, as if she wanted to say something but held back. Only then did Zhaoan notice me. His gaze lingered on my face for a moment, and he furrowed his brow slightly. "Miss Shin?" I couldn't help but shudder. In my previous life, every late night when he came to hold me accountable, he spoke in exactly that tone. I curtsied, maintaining a dignified yet respectful demeanor. "Your Highness, the Crown Prince, this servant's daughter greets you. Since my elder sister has matters to discuss with your Highness, I shall not disturb you further." After saying that, I was about to leave, but my cousin suddenly grabbed my sleeve and said urgently, "Don't go, little sister." With that tug, the paper in my hand fell to the ground. A gentle breeze blew, and the paper unfurled. The handwriting above leapt out at Zhaoan. Zhaoan's expression suddenly changed. He bent down to pick it up, his voice trembling. "Is this your handwriting?" My cousin's fingertip slipped from my sleeve and hooked her arm through Zhaoan's. "That's my younger sister's handwriting. The two of us have been practicing the same style of calligraphy since we were little." Zhaoan clutched my paper, his gaze shifting back and forth between my face and my cousin's. It took quite a while before he gave it back to me. I gave a slight bow and turned to leave. On the day of my cousin's wedding, I used the excuse that I wasn't feeling well to politely decline the invitation. My mother didn't press the issue, but she prepared a generous gift for me to take over there. The young maid came in and gave my shoulder a playful squeeze with a smile. "Miss, your future husband is here again." I held the round fan up to my face and didn't argue. The imperial edict arranging the marriage has already been issued. The wedding will take place after the Mid-Autumn Festival. I'm not very good at sewing, so I had to leave the making of my wedding dress to a professional embroiderer. Qin Shixing, worried that I might get bored staying at home, gathered up a bunch of little trinkets to give me. He came by again today, holding a snow-white fox in his arms. He said he'd picked it up from a merchant from the western regions. It had one blue eye and one yellow eye, and was truly beautiful. I held Rinu tightly, refusing to let go, so he sat beside me, watching me with a smile but saying nothing. "It's just a little too far." I looked at him in the other pavilion, feeling a little down. He waved, motioning for him to come over. Although we weren't allowed to see each other before the wedding, having been confined to the imperial palace for so long in my past life, I'd long since grown weary of all these rigid rules. But Qin Shixing shook his head, his ears turning red, and I could read his lips. That's against the rules. I glared at him, shoved Li Nu into the maid's arms, and ran off, holding the hem of my skirt. Unable to stop herself, she took the opportunity to throw herself into his arms. Qin Shixing's face flushed bright red again. He stood there with his arms outstretched, unsure whether to hug her or not, shaking his head and muttering, "That's against the rules. That's against the rules." I wrapped my arms tightly around his strong, muscular waist and looked up at him. "I don't eat people." He lowered his eyes. His Adam's apple bobbed, and he clenched his fists tightly behind his back. In a sullen tone, I vented my frustration. "So is it okay for Ahang to drop things off at my place every now and then?" He was at a loss for words. I pulled him down to sit, and he didn't resist. He just sat there with his back straight as a board, like one of those wooden posts used for training on the drill ground. The maids standing 10 steps away had long since turned their backs. Their shoulders were shaking violently, though I couldn't tell if they were trying to hold back laughter or feeling embarrassed for me. I had Qin Shixing sit on the stone bench. He didn't know where to look, glancing this way and that, until his gaze finally settled on the Li Nu in my arms. "Her name is Shuetuan," he said, his voice tightening. "Do you like her?" I rested my chin in my hands. "I love everything you give me." His ears turned a few shades redder, and it took him a while before he managed to say, "Well, that's good, then." I couldn't help but laugh out loud. After spending 5 long years cooped up in the depths of the palace in my past life, I had long forgotten how to laugh freely. Yet now, looking at this clumsy young man, I simply can't stop myself from smiling. He heard me laugh and finally turned to look at me, the light from the lotus-filled pond reflected in his eyes, and suddenly the corners of his lips curled upward as well. "You look beautiful when you smile." I looked at my reflection in the lake and, feeling quite self-absorbed, confirmed it. Of course! In an instant, the area around the lake was filled with laughter and cheerful chatter. 1 month before the Mid-Autumn Festival, the sage organized a polo tournament that lasted 3 days. Qin Shixing and Zhaoan are team leaders from different camps. The two forces consisted of the Eastern Palace Guard, led personally by the Crown Prince, and the elite border troops under the command of the Marquis of Jing'an's household. On the polo field, dust swirled and cheers rang out. I sat in a corner of the stands, next to my mother and several ladies from prominent families. After a few rounds, the head maid standing beside my cousin invited me over. My cousin was adorned with a phoenix crown and a ceremonial robe, yet a look of exhaustion she couldn't hide was evident in her eyes and brows. It had been just over a month since she married Zhaoan, and she had lost a lot of weight. Unlike me, she isn't restricted from coming and going by Zhaoan. My mother accompanied my aunt to the East Palace several times this month, and the news she brought back was that she and Zhaoan are getting along wonderfully. She sensed my confusion and lowered her voice. "Qin Nianxi, I know you're back, too. You must be pretty smug, watching me scrape by in fear of Zhaoan. That day at Jingyun Pavilion, you did that on purpose, didn't you?" I looked up at her and smiled slightly. "I don't understand what you're saying." "Of course I understand. In my previous life, before my cousin returned, Zhaoan would occasionally show a touch of humanity. When he was being kind to me, he would confide in me about his concerns regarding court affairs. As for people's livelihoods, I also shared my views with him, just as I had in my previous letter. Over time, he would become distracted. Sometimes he'd blurt out Sixen when addressing me, only to have his expression darken the very next second and withdraw all that tenderness. After my cousin gets married, he'll gradually realize that the woman by his side can't recite those poems or articulate those insights. Zhaoan would have his suspicions, but he wouldn't investigate them. He was a conceited man who wouldn't allow himself to be wrong. So, he could only take his frustration out on his cousin. Unlike me, she doesn't retreat to a side chamber and stay silent when she's ignored. She was the type to fight for what she wanted. The more she was ignored, the more she would pull out all the stops to prove that she was more deserving of him than Shishin. But she isn't Shishin. I spent 15 years poring over those poetry and prose works, as well as the political treatises, one book at a time, in my father's study. It was thanks to his mother, who hired countless tutors to provide him with careful instruction. Ever since she was a child, my cousin had been fond of cosmetics and fine silks. She could recite a few poems, but when it came to her views on governing the country and ensuring its stability, her lack of knowledge would become apparent after just a few sentences. Just as he was speaking, a gasp rang out. Zhao actually accidentally fell off his horse. The polo match had to be suspended. I furrowed my brow, quickly lifted the hem of my skirt, and made my way through the crowd to find Shin Shishing. The Imperial Medical Bureau staff carried Zhao away to treat him. I glanced over and saw blood trickling down his forehead. It looked like he'd taken quite a fall. After looking away, he headed straight for the splash of red in his field of vision. Shin Shishing was pulling on the reins, and the horse spun in place. With one hand he guided the horse, and with the other he pulled open his collar to cool off. The strands of hair on his forehead were damp with sweat and clung to his brow. When he saw me running toward him, he clearly paused for a moment, then dismounted and hurried over to meet me. "What are you doing over here? The stands are so far away, it must be exhausting to run all the way over here." As he spoke, he instinctively reached out to brush away the willow catkins that had landed on my hair, but his hand paused halfway and he sheepishly pulled it back. I found it amusing, so I decided to lean in a little closer. "I heard someone fell off a horse, so I came over to see if you were okay." He shook his head. "I'm fine." I picked up the handkerchief and wiped the sweat from his forehead. "I'm glad you're okay. A new restaurant just opened on East Street today, let's go check it out." We changed into our civilian clothes and left through the side gate. A muffled clap of thunder rumbled on the horizon. I had just said goodbye to Shin Shishing and was standing at my front door when the rain started to fall. I stood under the eaves, waiting for Luton to go get an umbrella. The rain fell hard and heavy, creating a hazy white mist on the blue flagstones. Through the curtain of rain, a fine horse galloped toward the Shin family mansion and reined in right in front of the gate. Zhao dismounted, and as he moved, his wound was aggravated. He let out a muffled groan, and blood seeped through the gauze on his temple. One of the bodyguards accompanying him tried to hold up an umbrella, but he pushed him aside. Rainwater streamed down his pale cheeks, soaking him from head to toe. Ignoring his wounds, he advanced toward me step by step. His eyes were dark and brooding as he stared intently at me, with a hint of madness in his gaze. I took a few steps back as I looked into those familiar eyes, and bumped into the door. My heart sank deeper and deeper. He suddenly spoke, his voice hoarse. Why don't you become my crown princess?" My palms were covered in cold sweat. Memories of a past life came flooding back like a tide. It's all still vivid in my mind. Even if I were to live my life over again, those memories would still coil around me like venomous snakes, and I'd still be startled awake in the middle of the night. I gathered my composure and looked up at him. "Don't you know, Your Highness? Now that everything has been set right, isn't this just perfect?" Zhao En's lips trembled, and his eyes were filled with panic. "But you are Shishin." I gave a slight smile. "Your Highness has finally admitted it. Whether in this life or the last, Your Highness has always known full well who I am, hasn't he?" Zhao En's eyes fluttered. He didn't dare look at me. It's so easy to verify my identity. I don't believe he didn't look into it, but he would never admit that he knew the truth. He'd rather pin me to the impostorplery and believe that my cousin is Shishin, because that way he wouldn't have to face the fact that he'd personally let down the one person who truly understood him. Admitting it would mean that his pride, his stubbornness, and the tenderness he'd shown his cousin over the years would all become a laughingstock. Now that I am engaged, it would be inappropriate for me to be alone with Your Highness. Please return to your quarters." Zhao En suddenly looked up, and as he thought of my marriage to Shin Shishing, his expression darkened. He stared at me for a long time, a cold smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "We're not even married. I can ask the Emperor for permission to marry you." No sooner had he spoken than Shin Shishing interrupted him with a punch. I've never seen Shinshishing like this before. Those calm eyes were churning with undisguised anger, and the blows landed with a satisfying thud. The guards immediately rushed forward, drawing their swords. I quickly grabbed Shinshishing's hand just as it was about to drop again. A glimmer of hope flickered in Zhaowen's eyes as he looked at Shinshishing with a smug expression. He turned to look at me, a hint of hurt in his eyes. I clasped his fingers tightly and whispered, "Don't hurt yourself, it wouldn't do for the groom to be disfigured." Zhaowen's expression suddenly changed. I looked at Zhaowen. "Your Highness, my marriage to the Marquis was personally decreed by His Majesty. If you wish to defy this decree, you must seek an imperial edict. Right here in the capital, the Crown Prince has forcibly taken a minister's wife. I wonder what the Emperor will think of this." After saying that, I took Shinshishing inside and had the servants close the door. The Emperor was so furious that he hurled all the memorials calling for his impeachment at Zhaowen, berated him for a full 2 hours in the imperial study, and confined him to the East Palace for 2 months. As for Shinshishing, he hasn't been able to meet with me this past month either. Zhaowen sent me one invitation after another in his cousin's name, asking me to come to the Eastern Palace. I saw right through him. He treated my cousin the same way he had treated me in a past life. He trapped her. They thought I would visit my cousin out of sisterly affection. In fact, that is not the case. The wedding preparations are proceeding smoothly. The wedding night. Shinshishing is even shyer than I am. Once he got into the spirit of things, he started running around recklessly just like a young kid. He buried his face in the crook of my neck, and his every breath made me burn. Nian nian, nian nian. I stared at the curtain, which was fluttering so fast it left after images, and found myself speechless. Shortly after our wedding, Shinshishing and I traveled to the northern frontier. It wasn't until I reached the north that I realized what it truly means to be surrounded by vast skies and open lands. Unlike the capital, the wind and sand here feel harsh against your face, and even your breath carries the scent of dirt. Fearing I might not be used to it, Shinshishing set aside a small courtyard just for me within the home mansion. It was decorated in the style of the capital, and even the window curtains were chosen in the same color as those in my boudoir. I've made a lot of friends here. Since Shinshishing had to attend drills during the day, I stayed at the mansion with the military doctor, learning to identify medicinal herbs and apply bandages. At first, those veteran military doctors were quite polite, respectfully addressing me as madam at every turn. But once we got to know each other better, they started teasing me. They say the Marquis used to refuse to apply any medicine even when he was injured. But now look at him, he comes running to ask me for a plaster at the slightest scrape. Shinshishing's ears turned bright red as he scolded them with a stern face, calling them big mouths. But then she turned her head and quietly held out her arm to me. There was a faint red mark on it, a mark left by a horsewhip that had accidentally struck her. "It doesn't hurt," he said, but his eyes were fixed on me. I held back a smile as I applied the ointment to him, and he just sat there quietly, his eyes following the movement of my fingers. Time flies. Before we knew it, the year was coming to an end. We were on our way back to the capital when news reached us that Zhaowen had been stripped of his title as crown prince. Inside the carriage, Shinshishing set down the court gazette and furrowed his brow slightly. I didn't lean in to look. I just leaned against the side of the car, holding the snowball in my arms and stroking its fur, stroke by stroke. "Want to know?" he asked. "I don't want to." He glanced at me, said nothing more, and folded the court gazette, tucking it into his sleeve. The wind was howling outside, and the wheels made a faint crunching sound as they rolled over the thin layer of ice on the highway. I peered out through a crack in the curtain. The sky was gray and overcast, as if snow were about to fall. It was drizzling the day my cousin was expelled from the estate. She knelt in a disheveled state at the gate of the Eastern Palace. The Song family wouldn't let her go back either. I pulled back the curtain and looked into her eyes through the rain and mist. He ordered a maid to help her into the carriage and drove off toward the nunnery. This was her only way out. My cousin clutched the blanket around her and glared at me with hatred in her eyes. "What a show! Do you believe I'll push you off?" I didn't say anything. I just helped her brush a strand of hair that had fallen against her cheek back into place. Since I dared to ride in the same carriage with her, I was fully prepared. Just a single movement. My cousin's eyes suddenly welled up, and tears began to stream down her face. How dare he? He didn't even know what you looked like. He fell in love with those letters. I stayed by his side for so long, only to be killed in the end by his poisoned wine. It's not fair. It's not fair. Are you resenting me, too? Resenting me for treating you that way? But I had no choice. Why do you have to be better than me in every way? Poetry and literature, family background, looks, talent, and knowledge? I had to keep climbing the social ladder just to have a chance to secure a seat at the palace banquets, so that my name wouldn't just be tacked on as an afterthought every time you send out invitations to you. She covered her face and wept. Little sister, it's my fault. Ever since you died, I haven't been able to sleep a wink at night. I raised you all by myself. How could I have treated you that way? How could they treat you like that? I knew she was really crying her heart out. In her past life, her actions outside my palace were also genuine. Song Xian is the kind of person who isn't quite pure enough to be a good person, yet isn't thorough enough to be a bad one. She went out of her way to invent a compelling excuse for herself, dragging others into her misery along with her. But the damage has already been done, and I just can't bring myself to forgive her. Her sobs echoed through the carriage. By the time we arrived at the nunnery, the rain had stopped. The abbess had been waiting at the temple gate for quite some time. My cousin gradually stopped crying. Before she left, she said to me, "Little sister, I'll spend the rest of my life making amends." I watched her walk into the convent, then turned and walked toward the man standing nearby. With a smile, she swung herself onto the horse before he could. She looked down and reached out her hand toward him. The Marquis taught me how to ride for so long in the northern frontier. Today is the day to see the results. Xin Shixing looked up at me. The light of the sky after the rain was reflected in his eyes, and the corners of his lips slowly curled upward. He took my hand, swung himself onto the horse, and pulled me close against his chest. He handed me the reins from his side. His chin rested against my shoulder, and his voice was low and amused. "Then please lead me today, my lady." I clamped my legs against the horse's flanks and cracked the whip to urge it on. The horse's hooves splashed through the puddles, sending up fine droplets of water. A gentle breeze brushed past the tips of her hair, and the person behind her tightened their arm around her. "Nian Nian. Ha! In my next life, I'll go to your grab the gift ceremony again, and I'll make sure you can't let go of me." I let the corners of my mouth curl up. Without turning around, the clatter of hooves startled a flock of birds into flight. The clouds are parting on the horizon, and the sunlight is warm. That's the end of the story. Thank you all for sticking with me. See you in the next post.